and welcome to In Conversation with LabourList and the Fabian Society. My name's Emma Burnell and I am the editor of LabourList, and I am so delighted that for our first of these events, which we will be holding monthly, I am joined by Steve Rotheram, who is the Metro Mayor of the Liverpool City Region. Steve, welcome.
Yeah.
I got it in the end.
And too much of a mouthful, isn't it?
It's quite the job title.
It is, but there's a very good reason that it's the Metro Mayor, because we're called Metro Mayors across the country, and so the government refers to us as Metro Mayors, but everyone calls themselves Mayor. Cobard or Mayor.
And are you Mayor Steve, or are you...
No, just Steve.
Just Steve.
Very much, yeah.
So, obviously, we wanted to have a long conversation with you, talk about what's brought you to where you are. We will be taking questions throughout the thing. So, if you do have questions, please email them to questions@labourlist.org. But we've also had some questions that have come in from some of our readers, and I've even got some of my own.
Wow.
But first of all, I mean, you were born in Kirby in Liverpool, that's right. One of 8 children.
Yes.
That must have been a noisy household.
It was very noisy, especially as that we were all music mad. So my mum used to play Mario Lanza, I remember, and especially Roy Orbison. So I've brought up on music in the house.
And did you all have the same taste, or was there real competition over whose music was going to win?
No, my mum's always won.
Good for mum.
Yeah, good for mum. No, we used to all have our own individual favourites, of course, and I got into the Beatles and the Jam, as some people I'm sure who are older on this audience might remember. My brother was into Blondie, Debbie Harry, if you remember. And all
yeah.
that. My sister was into a bit of sort of Liverpool music, so Teardrop Explodes.
Oh,
and
yeah,
Echo and the Bunnymen
absolutely.
Yeah, so there's a real sort of eclectic taste in music across the whole of the family.
And your dad was a Labour councillor, is that right?
He was, yeah.
So were you always destined for politics?
I'm quite the opposite. I didn't want to do anything that my dad did, to tell you the truth. No, it was more that my dad was involved in, obviously, local politics and staunch Labour, but he did some stuff with Harold Wilson, because Harold Wilson was the local MP at the time. Even though he was from Yorkshire, he was a Liverpool City Region MP, as we'd call it now, in Huyton. And so he was one of the sub-agents there, and I got involved in the Labour Party at a very early age, and we dug out last year a letter from Kirby Labour Party, and I was 11 years of age, and it thanked me for my unstinting work on behalf of the party. And it says in the letter, we've sent you something as a token of our esteem, which I remember to this day, and it was a double Milky Way.
Ah, double Milky Way.
Yes.
That's impressive.
It was, and there was obviously 4 younger ones, and they didn't get a sniff of the double Milky Way.
Did you get that to yourself?
I had a lot.
Very nice. Yes, I was pushed around in my pushchair delivering leaflets through the lower letterboxes, but I don't remember ever getting a Milky Way for it, so I think you're winning.
It should be standard, shouldn't it? I think
Absolutely.
Yeah, that would attract more people to do the hard work for us.
I mean, you sort of indicated there that you didn't want to do anything that your dad did, and I know that his sort of dedication to politics in some ways took him away from your family. How do you find getting that balance? Just making sure that politics isn't the only thing that you ever talk about. And I give viewers a little peek behind the curtain here. We've actually spent the last 20 minutes talking about football.
We have, and you have to have a life outside of politics. That's really important. But I do think the demands on our politicians are extreme, and certainly you can imagine for people in Parliament who are new mothers and that sort of stuff, but it's better than it was.
Yeah.
There was no recognition many years ago. The other thing I'd say about politics and the sort of pressures that we're under, social media has created a whole new dimension that, generations before didn't have. So when I walked into the House of Commons in 2010, and I'd never been into the House of Commons ever in my life, so I walked into the chamber and was expecting this enormous, great, big thing that you see on the telly, and it's the opposite of the TARDIS, isn't it? It's very constrained, and the sort of distances between those seats are very small. but it looks bigger on the telly. But I think the understanding is that everybody just settles down and does their own thing and finds their feet and all that. I thought that was really, really problematic for politicians. Now, apparently, you have more than a 1 hour induction because that's all we got.
Good Lord.
Yeah, they kept on talking about, it was like the Tories on one side and us on the other side. And Hardy Alexander was talking to me about this at the weekend when we were doing regional conference. And she remembers vividly my interjection in regard to something that the Tories were saying. And they were really winding me up. And they were talking about Erskine May. And I didn't know Erskine May. I genuinely didn't. I thought it was Theresa May's brother. So I was like, who's this Erskine May? And then got it explained to me. And I thought, and they were all trying to big up themselves, you know. So I'm new. I'm the new kid on the block. But look at me, Tory party. I'm going to be this. Jacob Rees-Mogg was one of them.
Oh, well, yeah.
And so they were all asking questions about how they got motions down and how they did all this sort of stuff. And I stood up, and this is what Hardy remembers, and I said, I'm just wondering, it was at Clark's, I'm just wondering whether there's a translation service for people on those benches to understand people like me with regional accents. Yeah. And she said straight away, she sussed me out as being somebody who's probably going to be a bit difficult.
Bit fun.
But the Tories laughed until he realised that the joke was actually on them, not on me.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, I mean, the Tories are more guilty of it, but I think we all in politics have that terrible habit of when we know something, we invent a language around it. I mean, for example, most of our watchers will probably be Labour Party members who will have gone to the EC of the GC, and you're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, we love an acronym.
And it just keeps us in our bubble away from other people, so that we just you can't be understood.
And there's a difficulty in that, isn't it? Because then you're only getting a certain type who will want to join that group in politics. And we need a very broad range and breadth of people who can bring their experiences to politics, even if they never stand on the front line. They're the sort of people who ask you the interesting questions when you go to CLPs or to wards. I think that's really important, that we keep that very grounded view of politics through our membership.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think coming back to something you were saying earlier about the importance of not being single-minded on politics. I mean, we have tribal instincts as human beings. We are Labour. And sometimes within Labour, we then split up into further tribes. But, you were talking about football earlier. You're obviously a very, very strong Liverpool fan.
Yeah.
And, that too is that sense of real positive belonging to a tribe. So there are lots of different ways that we can interpret it. It's just making sure that we do it in a positive way rather than a negative way.
I think that's a really good point, because I'll go back to my younger days, and I had a visceral hatred of everything Tory, everything, because Thatcher was wreaking havoc on places like the North, and certainly areas like Liverpool. If you remember, Liverpool was singled out.
Absolutely.
The cabinet actually sat around the table deliberating whether they should have a managed decline of what was once second city of empire, even though we don't agree with empires. Donald, if you're listening. But that sort of thing, I think, is fairly limiting and quite poisonous. So you can have different views, completely different views of people with, against other people. But obviously that very rarely should take the form that we've seen some of it, where it turns into violent acts. I'm saying it should hardly ever, and that's because Farage, I think for me, would be the one person if I got a chance. Yeah, I mean that would really test the metal. Yeah.
I mean, coming back to football, your book Head North, which you co-wrote with Andy Burnham, who we may or may not come on to later, it opens on Hillsborough, where you were at Hillsborough on that day, and that's clearly been a very, very defining event in your life, something that you've not just that day but ever since.
Yeah, I think if you're a socialist, you have an inherent sense of injustice, and I saw that writ large, obviously, because being there and then coming back and reading accounts of what supposedly had happened when I'd
were
seen
there
with
and
my
you-
own
yeah.
eyes that this wasn't the truth. So we knew it was lies from day one. And there were people, some very senior people at the time, who were saying this is a right-wing conspiracy, you know, this is the establishment sort of circling the wagons, but nobody was listening. And it has to be said, there were people in our party who weren't listening at the time. So that fight for truth and justice has been 36 years now. And whilst the truth is out there, and that's brilliant, and that's, by the way, that's due directly to a Labour government that did that through the Hillsborough
Absolutely.
Independent Panel, so we should never forget that. The Tories had 2 and 3 times as long in power and did nothing. And we did do something, and we're doing stuff now on the Hillsborough law. But while all that was going on, we've never had anybody who's been held accountable for 97 unlawful killings on British soil.
Absolutely. And I think that fight for justice, I've spent quite a lot of time in Liverpool, and I think it has shaped the city in many ways. Like, you would never see, for example, a sticker in practically every taxi saying "Don't buy the Sun." You'd barely see a taxi in Liverpool without one.
Yeah.
And that, you know, that is a working class solidarity, because, as you say, these people were ignored and lied about for years.
Yeah.
And that is going to shape a city.
I think so, and I think you're right. It has certainly had a big impact on its outlook as a city and on people from Liverpool per se. They, you know, are very wary of believing things that they read, and this is long before social media. So, you know, we'd seen how that headline in that scurrilous newspaper talked about the truth.
Yeah.
And when they knew at that time, under that banner headline, that it was the lies, and to sort of try to clear your name for so long does shape the type of people that you become. And so that's why you see a lot of people from the Liverpool City Region, and certainly from Liverpool, who are involved in many of these really worthy campaigns that are also now trying to unravel injustices in the past. And we've got, unfortunately, in this country, a very long history where the state has conspired against its own people. And that's why I think some of the things that we've seen recently are no surprise to the people in Liverpool. So obviously the post office scandal, no surprise to people at all.
No, and I think it's really, I think there's a huge tension sometimes on the left and within Labour that we believe in the state. You know, our ethos is the state helping people, the welfare state, the NHS, and yet we are also very wary of the state at the same time because of that overreach of power. How do you kind of balance those two thoughts in your head at the same time?
Well, it's difficult because I was brought up in a family that showed respect to those people in authority. I've been brought up from a very, very early age with that as the overriding ethos of what we believed. And then when you see that sections of those people in senior positions in the country who conspire against a people's, then there's obviously a real dichotomy of things flowing through you. You know, should we trust people in authority? Well, of course we should. And what we need to do is to root out those people who are unworthy of those offices, or, you know, they've somehow committed things whereby we would distrust them from having that authority. That's why the Hillsborough law is so important, because we need people in senior positions, first of all, to tell the truth. And isn't it bizarre that...
Isn't it astonishing we have to have a law to say that?
We have to enshrine it in legislation for people to tell the truth. And, you know, that's what we're going through at the moment. And I have to say, you know, Keir Starmer at Labour Party conference made a commitment to it. And whilst there's been some to-ing and fro-ing and all that, I'm still confident that the significant things that were asked for in Andy Burnham and myself, the bill that we put to Parliament, I'm absolutely certain that we'll get that through this legislative period.
So, speaking of Andy, obviously we are recording this just after and in the middle of the Gorton and Denton by-election, which Andy hoped to be the candidate for. And you spoke out at the weekend asking people to stop being idiots, basically, if I can paraphrase. How do you feel coming out the other side of those couple of weeks?
The bit that I've always hated in politics, and people will probably listen to this and go away and do some research. I've never done anything that was unattributed to me, if it's what I want to say. I've never said, a spokesperson for Steve Rotheram said such and such a thing. But we seem to get a lot of these people who feel comfortable briefing against other Labour politicians, and I hate it. I don't care who it is. I've always hated it, when the Brown Blair stuff was going on. I didn't like it then, and it's gone on a lot before that. So to then see somebody so totally misrepresenting what somebody has achieved, I just thought, well, that was enough. And what I wanted to do genuinely is to put a line in the sand and say, look, let's move on. Let's put all this to one side, because the most important thing for all of us is that we don't get Reform winning that by-election.
Absolutely.
And that's why Andy Burnham went out on the Sunday afterwards to campaign for our candidate there. I think we've got a really good candidate, to tell you the truth, somebody who knows the area, which I also think is really important.
Yeah.
So she's been a councillor there for some time. So it's somebody we can get behind anyway. But, I, as always, think my mates can do a really good job, because that's why you have mates.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not just
Although I have to say, I have mates I would not let anywhere near running the Labour Party.
Well, yes, indeed. There's some of my mates who I wouldn't let run Liverpool Football Club, because... but
which matters to you more, Steve?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. Don't go on to that, please. We'll edit that bit out, okay? So, but look, the party at this moment needs to all get behind what's happening in Greater Manchester. Absolutely. And get that candidate with a decent enough majority so that Reform can't somehow claim victory in whatever bizarre and perverse way they often do. They are an existential threat, not just to the Labour Party, but to this country. And if we ever see that man Farage ever walking down Downing Street, it would strike fear into everybody that I know, everybody who believes in that sort of that social justice element of politics.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, moving on from the recent drama, Andy Burnham recently coined the term Manchesterism. So what is the difference between Liverpoolism and Manchesterism? Is there a difference?
I think so, yeah. I'd say we're more successful. No, I mean, there's always that rivalry between Liverpool and Manchester, and it's football. And actually, rivalry's fine. Tribalism, I think, is the difficult bit where it turns into nastiness. So I think that they've got some brilliant stuff that they've been able to do over many, many years. And they are, according to Mr. Burnham, the fastest growing city region in the whole world. So
does he rub that in a bit?
A little tiny bit, yeah. No, we're not competitive at all. But obviously, from our starting point, from where Liverpool City Region was, without any infrastructure, without a history of working together and all that, we've built something different than them. So I think that Andy went into an organisation where that was the super tanker, and he has had to steer it in a different direction. Whereas we built our own more nimble fleet, we've been able to tack and to ensure that we've got to where we need to get to more quickly than the super tanker would. So whilst Manchester has done brilliant, Greater Manchester is a fantastic place, there's a lot that the Liverpool City Region are leading on nationally, internationally and globally.
And your book that you wrote together is called Head North. And we've got a question here from Carney McCarran Holmes, who says, whenever mayors talk about the North, they always forget about the areas above the M62. Why don't Labour politicians remember that Cumberland needs economic support too? So to broaden that out, not that I'm forgetting about Cumberland, but is there a coherent the North? And what does that mean in terms of thinking about politics?
I think why any area sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes is not included in what we talk about. It's the areas that already have devolution and therefore have metro mayors.
Yeah.
So we try to speak across the north with one voice, and you've got 16 million people that are represented across the north by metro mayors. So, twice as many as London, if you like. And we firmly believe that we've not had a fair crack of the whip over many, many decades, and that there has been significant attention on the south and southeast. Now, nobody is jealous or having a pop at that. That was the right thing to do. But now, if we're truly to rebalance the economy, then what we need is to unleash the latent potential in areas right the way across the north. So we talk about the Great North now, if you know what I'm talking about with the Brendan Foster stuff. Yeah. So he's got the Great North Run.
Yeah.
And we've used that brand.
I'm aware of it. I'm not doing it.
Well, same here, yeah. Kim was trying to get me to do it as well. But that whole thing then makes some real coherence. And if you have a look at the agglomeration effect, in other words, the way in which each area supports each other and it's greater than the sum of its parts. If you have a look at that in that sort of whole area across the north of England, don't forget, when we talk about the north, I've got friends in Scotland who go, well, where?
Yeah. So, you're the Midlands.
Yeah. So I get the geography, but we're talking about that area where it runs from Liverpool to Hull, right the way across. And nearly all Labour metro mayors. And there's huge things that we can do together collectively, which we have done, which are moving things forward. So NPR, for instance, NPR could have ended up with a bit of a shambles because it's been like that for the 9 years that I've been the metro mayor and part of something called Transport for the North. So TFN, whilst we've all worked together and TFN's been the conduit for that, nothing's really happened because of central government.
Yeah.
Now you've got central government who want to work with northern leaders. So we're starting to see all of those plans, not just on the drawing board, but starting to come to fruition.
So we talked, I'll tell you, I read obviously your book in preparation for this, and it was covered in Post-it notes.
Sorry about that.
No, it's very enjoyable. It's a genuine page turner. I did cry at the Hillsborough bit, I have to admit. But I had 2 Post-it notes stuck on the front with 2 words on it. The first was agglomeration, which we've already talked about, and the other one is subsidiarity, which is about doing the right things at the right level. Some things internationally, some things nationally, some things locally.
Yeah.
But it's always very easy when your party's in opposition to say, we will devolve power, we will give power away. And it's always really hard when you finally get your hands on that power to say, oh, here, you have it.
Yeah.
How do we convince people that it is in their interest, in their political interests, in the interests of the country, for mayors to be given greater powers over things like local taxation, for example?
Well, we are the party of devolution, the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly and what we did in Northern Ireland. Have a look at our record is obviously that's where our leanings are towards. But there are some within our own ranks who are censorists and they don't believe so much in devolution. Some departments are very much about centralising power in Westminster and not devolving it out. But if you have a look at other countries, as we did as part of the research for the book, both of Andy and myself went over to Germany, and you have a look at the way the 14 Länder in Germany have provided the economic conditions and the support so that they individually become almost little superpowers in different areas. That's what we're claiming that we can do in the likes of the Liverpool City Region. We don't want the exact same as Greater Manchester or Tracy has got in West Yorkshire. We don't want that. They've got their own identity, and we have, and we should build on that so that life sciences and the stuff that we're doing, because life sciences is a big area of work, and we're very good at some life sciences. So pharmaceutical manufacture, for instance, we're the epicenter of that, and communicative disease and control, the likes of Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, we're ahead on those things, whereas Oliver's doing something or David's doing something else. So allow us the opportunity to grow those sectors for UK PLC. And if you have a look at when Labour wasn't in power, we still had pockets of real power for Labour. And have a look at what they did with a Tory government. Imagine what we could do if we have a Labour government and Labour Metro mayors working in unison.
Absolutely. And I mean, that reminds me of the part in your book where you're talking about the culture that you find when you go into the mayoralty, and there's nothing really been built up, and in fact, nothing but resistance built up.
Yeah.
And that's partly because of some of the local political issues, but also you say you're going in to be this new job created by a Tory government, under a Tory government, and there is a real resistance to working with the Tories for obvious reasons, particularly in Liverpool. And your what I found really interesting was your kind of unpacking of how to take a pragmatic approach to people you disagree with.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth thinking about how that worked under the Tories, but is that equally true when it's people you disagree with that you didn't think you were going to because they're in your own party?
I'm a pragmatist, so our Prime Minister has said that it's country first, party second. Now, if you think that's fine for a Prime Minister to say that, it's fine for a Metro Mayor to say
Liverpool
that
first.
It's place first, and politics second. So we've had to work with all sorts of unpalatable things, including a certain Boris Johnson, and you talk about Hillsborough and his part in perpetuating the myths around that and the Ken Bigley killing. Anyone can read this online if they want to follow it up, but you'll see that Johnson was a pariah. And yet, when we were tasked with sorting out COVID locally, remember at first he tried to do everything from the centre and you can't do it. And then they started to realise that we could do things that they couldn't. Well, one of them was that we were going into the highest tier 3 at the time. And I spoke to Johnson, and people will remember it, I think, more that Andy and Johnson, they wouldn't speak to each other. They had an intermediary, and then the famous one of, I think, in Manchester Town Hall, where Andy and his cagoule and all that, and Kevin hands him the phone, and it's just basically saying, you're getting nothing. We were, as I say, more pragmatic in regard to, we were in a very, very different space than Greater Manchester. Greater Manchester had been in the highest tier for about 7 weeks and never had a penny. So that's what Andy was fighting for. He was saying, we need to be compensated for the detrimental impact that this has had on our businesses. Whereas we were going from, if we're now going into the highest tier, we want a deal now for our businesses who are going to be impacted. And it's like we didn't speak to each other. So I'd say to Andy, they've offered us 25 million, but obviously that's a drop in the ocean. So Andy would go and say, listen, I know that you've offered Liverpool City Region 25 million, so we want 45. And then we'd say, we know you're negotiating with Andy Burnell for 45, so we want... So that's how those things went. But at the end of the day, it was the Liverpool City Region, if you remember, that was chosen for mass testing. It was us, so all of them lateral flow stuff, that was the Liverpool City Region. Now, could you genuinely imagine that a Tory government working with Labour leaders, because we're all Labour leaders, in a place like the Liverpool City Region would ever
I mean, it's a long way from the 80s, isn't it?
Wow, isn't it? But we did that because we had to try and save lives. We were in danger of, we were 2 weeks away from our hospitals refusing anybody with any sort of illnesses and all that sort of stuff. And we had the third highest COVID rate, R rate in Europe, in Knowsley. So we knew we had to do something because people were going to die. Yeah. And that's where the pragmatism kicks in rather than the politics.
And coming back slightly to politics, we've been talking about, we've got to win this by-election, we've got to beat reform, overall. There's a question here from Ken Wild, who's asked why Labour doesn't fully support PR. But I'm aware that I'm pushing at an open door. Yeah. But what struck me, because I've been knocking around a while, you and Andy both kind of favour slightly different flavours of PR.
Yeah.
And isn't that always what stops it actually getting anywhere?
Yeah, and it often stops the left, doesn't it? You know, because we all have slightly different views on what we need to do. We were with Billy Bragg in Glastonbury. That's not a name drop. It's just like we happened to be there and Billy Bragg was there. And he came over and he was talking to us. And he was very interested in politics, always has been, if you remember, always a great Labour supporter. And was saying, you know, how can we engage more people in politics? And we got onto the voting system. Andy's just PR. He's right for, you know, proportional representation, and that should be the only thing that we do. And then having a second chamber, which we both agree on, which should be an elected chamber of the Senate of the regions and nations. So that should be the second chamber, the reforming chamber. How we get there is slightly different. I wanted to retain and maintain the constituency link.
Yeah. So
when I was an MP, I wasn't going to stand for a seat in Wolverhampton or for somewhere in Essex or whatever. And in fact, I only wanted to stand in the seat that I lived in Liverpool. So I was Walton, where Aintree is where I live. So that was the only thing that attracted me to it when I was asked. So I think that's a really important part of our democracy. If it's just straight PR, as you know, they just allocate the seats out proportionally and you don't know who you're getting to represent you. The system that Billy Bragg talked about was that you have a constituency link, so people have first past the post for their MPs, but the second chamber is then constructed proportionally on the number of votes that a party get nationally. And then you distribute that into the second chamber. That was much more attractive to me. And that's why we certainly have got the same intent, but the way in which we get there is slightly different.
I mean, I think that's possibly the left in a nutshell. I don't care if you're from the Progress faction or the Momentum faction or
absolutely, yeah,
the myriad of other factions. I think we all have basically the same aims and slightly different routes to them. Yeah. But I do also think that sometimes we get very hung up on the roots and we think it's the tool that's important rather than the thing we're going to do with it.
Yeah.
So I come back to your sort of pragmatism point. When there are things like, for example, one of the things that has been a real symbol of the fights over devolution has been railways.
Yes.
Northern Power Railway, the HS2 debacle. But equally, one of the things that Labour members will tell us that they're particularly proud of is the establishment of Great British Railways, which is a national, big, shiny public railway ownership. Yeah. So how do you work pragmatically within that, and what's the role of Metro mayors in working with things like Great British Railways?
Well, it shows us sometimes the swings and vicissitudes of our own party, that at one stage, because I was part of a group who called for the renationalisation of our rail system, I was seen as being on the far
wildly
left.
On the left.
Yeah. And now it's just one of our core principles. I would go much further. I think that those things that we could take back that don't need to be nationalised because there's no competition, like water, for instance. And I've had this with North West Water, who've got a brilliant chief executive. But I said, listen, while I'm supporting the investment that you're putting in, I think this would be better under public ownership. So there are things within our party that we have differences on and different opinions of how we can get there. But actually, what we're all talking about, what every single one of us believes in, is that things have to be better for the customer or the passenger or the end user. Or that's what drives us. And it's not the same in other political parties where a profit motive is the number one. And then if you can do all of those other customer servicey type things, then that comes secondary. So I don't think there's an awful lot sometimes between us, and we artificially inflate the differences. And I think we need to just have a period where we all settle down and shut up for a while and concentrate on what we need to do. And the thing we need to do is to defeat Reform and the Greens in Denton, in Gorton and Denton. We need to do that first, because that's in the immediacy, isn't it? That's got only 3 or 4 weeks for us to do that. And then we need to take stock, don't we, about how we can better connect our party with the electorate, because we're not doing great in the polls. We've got locals coming up in May, and I'm genuinely concerned that we'll lose votes to a shyster and a party who do not represent the views of working class people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just like to thank Michael Singleton for the question on the rail, just to make sure that our viewers feel that they're being fully represented. In terms of, we've had a number of questions on things like land value tax, something that some in Labour Party have been campaigning for a long time. And I know in your book you raise land value capture, which is pretty much the same thing. But also, how would, if that were to happen, how would you want to design that to ensure that the value of that land is captured where that land is and where that investment is happening, rather than being sucked into the Treasury and then redistributed back out again willy-nilly?
I think, that's the main point. So ours is about the uplift that you get from development and capturing some of the value of that, so that goes back, which then allows you to do other things that will then increase the land. And at this moment in time, the main beneficiaries of public investment are often private companies, and we don't think that that's sustainable. So it has to be a partnership approach, and land value uplift, and then the capturing the value of that is really important to us. It's part of what we've put forward to the government over the fiscal devolution that we would like to see that Metro mayors get greater control of. And by the way, we're not talking about UDI, you know what I mean? We're talking about sensible and pragmatic ways in which we can grow the pot so that we can do some of the wonderful things that we want to do in our individual city regions. And that can only happen by us also sharing in the benefits of the developments that are facilitated under the public purse.
Now, you've talked about what we need to do is beat Reform. But why? I don't mean why do we need to beat Reform. We know why Reform are terrible. But I always think sometimes we get very captured by stopping the bad thing. And I think some of the parts of your book, you talked about how Labour can enable a good life. We had a question, for example, from Jennifer Davidson on care. Yeah. So what are the things that a Labour government should, first and foremost, what are the 5 evils, going back to Beveridge, or what are the modern ways in which a Labour government should be putting at the heart to make people's lives better?
It's still the 5 evils. They might be in a modern setting, but those sort of things about want and squalor, and you have a look at some of our deprived areas, and we still have them same sorts of issues that we're trying to tackle today as former generations of politicians did all of those decades and eras ago. So I think, for instance, we need to do more about housing, because one of the greatest manifestations of something that's going wrong with political policy is homelessness. I've walked around London today, you see homelessness all the time. That's not because Sadiq Khan's not doing something about it. I know he's doing all sorts of wonderful things, but it's like that leaking colander. The more that we sort out certain people, unfortunately, there's still those who are slipping through the net. What I've done in the Liverpool City region is a housing first approach, which again demonstrates Labour values in power. It's not a sanctions first approach, which the Tories did, if you remember. This is getting somebody into their own home, providing them with their own things, and then building the wraparound support for those people.
Yeah, it's the sort of flippant, isn't it? It's not prove to us you're good enough to come into this service. It's come into this service and we will make your life good enough.
Yeah, well, these people have got multi-complex issues, you know, and some really terrible and heartbreaking stories behind the individual. You know, women have been in coercive relationships and had all sorts of horrible things done to them, and then finding their independence again and having their own home and the support. And I went to see one woman who was estranged from her family. They were there as she sort of graduated, because she'd gone through Housing First and then through something called Households into Work, where she'd ended up with a job and she got her kids back and all that. They're the type of things that we can do. That's Labour values in action. And they're, you know, when you talk about care, our councils are suffering so much because the burden of that is falling on our councils to try to deal with. When you've got cost inflation and all sorts of other problems, and they're spending 70 in the Liverpool City Region, 75%, so 75p of every single pound goes on adult and child social services, and they've got 25% for everything else.
Yeah.
That's a broken country.
Yeah.
So when you hear the likes of Farage talking about broken Britain, it was he and his acolytes and the sort of sons and daughter of Thatcher who have presided over the fact that it's broken. We're trying to fix broken Britain, if you want to call it that. And I wouldn't. Britain's not broken. There are parts of it that are awful.
It's looking a little rough around the edges on occasion, but it's not broken.
Yeah, you should see me on a Saturday morning. You know, we're not broken. And all it is then providing the opportunity for people to recover, for places to recover. Only Labour do that in power. You know, the Tories divide and conquer. Labour trying to pull things together, trying to give people from the grassroots up opportunities that the Tories would never, ever give them.
Now, I'm going to apologise to viewers, but I do need to let the people behind the desk know that my iPad has died, so we're going to have to go analogue with any questions and timing. So when I think that there are some really interesting ideas in your book. And I am a natural devolutionist. I also worked for a local government think tank for quite some time, so if I wasn't a natural devolution, I had it beaten into me. But I'm also a Londoner.
Yeah.
And there is quite a lot of, I wouldn't say it's anti-London, but it's sort of talking about, London gets X, Y, and Z, and we should get X, Y. So convince me. Because I also think, there is sometimes when people think of London, they think of the very, Kensington, and not even the whole of Kensington and Chelsea. But convince me from East London that I should get on board and head north.
I'll give it a very real example. So I've been round the sort of Westminster and Whitehall circuit today, meeting secretaries of state and all sorts of weird and wonderful people. And I've said this to Steve Reid. I said, can you show me a place in London that was bombed in the Second World War but hasn't been regenerated? And there aren't any. The last one was many years ago that was regenerated. That's a good thing. I can take you round whole areas in the Liverpool City region, because we were the second most bombed after London. Everyone thinks it's Coventry, but it was Liverpool because of the docks. But I can take you round whole areas that still have bomb damage today. And all we're saying is, that's really good that you've done that in London. How about us having a turn to have some of these things? I've never, ever been anti-London. I worked in London in the 80s when Liverpool, basically, under the Tories, under Thatcher, was literally a ghost town. And so I was a bricklayer by trade. So I came down here to build up. I did Hendon. I remember it was a great big area of housing, and worked on the housing there. It was like have trowel, will travel. Ended up in the Falklands and all sorts of weird. But that was to get work because there weren't the right jobs in Liverpool. There weren't many jobs, but they were political decisions. If you fast forward to today, we've gone from, for instance, our graduate retention was really, really poor. And that shows you then we're not creating the right types of jobs. We've gone from the bottom 10 to the top 3 in graduate retention. Our, what they call economically inactive numbers have gone 10% higher of people into jobs than anywhere else. When you're seeing declines in this, all of the things that we know we're capable of, all of the economic indicators available are all on an upward trend. We know we're one of the fastest growing areas in the whole of the country. Them things don't happen by osmosis. That's because we plan that and we have very firm views on taking people with us. So we're not doing it to anybody, we're doing it with people. And that's, honestly, I get back to the very simple fact that when Labour are in power, they deliver for people. And when we see other parties, they'll deliver for very narrow groups. And obviously, if we ever have the misfortune of having someone like Farage as a Prime Minister, which frightens the life out of me, but if we ever were, he would only deliver for his mates.
Yeah.
And if the working class people in this country are kidded by somebody like him, then we need to get our act together so that we can show that united, a Labour Party working in cahoots with the Labour members and all of the machinery that we have can deliver for ordinary people. No other party can do that. I've never seen any evidence of any other party being able to achieve what we can achieve in power.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to ask you a very technical question, but in the book, you talk about having a constitution.
Yes.
And the key thing that you want to have in this is a basic law. So first of all, I'll ask you to explain what the basic law is.
So when there was reunification in East and West Germany, the area with the higher incomes, obviously the West, were asked to contribute to the growth in the East. And so they had a basic income, which meant that they pulled the areas that would be left behind through communism up to similar standards. And then we've seen the whole of Germany taken off. You've seen what happened to that former eastern part of Germany and some of the great things that they're able to do. So we have evidence, don't we, that if you do invest in areas, then you get this growth. And that's part of what we want with the basic law. And also to address the fundamental point of what you're talking about before with London, we need to change the methodology by which we assess projects, and that's the Green Book. And so Rachel now has said that she's going to look at the formula by which we assess, and the Liverpool City Region has been chosen as the pilot area.
Well, I mean, I can see why, because this is something that you go into in quite a lot of depth in the book.
It's been driving me nuts, that's why. Yeah.
And the Green Book, I mean, this is what I'm quite interested in. So the Green Book, Rachel is talking about changing the 4 areas of the Green Book. I think you particularly highlighted in the book. Is that enough if Rachel changes the way that they do the Green Book? Or is it because that's a change that is done within that one department, it's not legislated for, it's not encoded? Would you stop at that, or would you say, no, actually we need to put this into the legislation of a basic law?
I think the first thing is that they are the first government for a long time, and it was a previous Labour government that looked at this also, but they've accepted the fundamental flaw, which is that if the formula is predicated on the fact that you've got land values as part of it and wages as part of it, then the South and South East are always going to be higher than the North. So you can't have a like-for-like comparison. And what we're saying is that if you include other things, then you're more likely to get that balance that we need, because there are investable projects in the North that would never, ever be able to attract some government support because of the Green Book methodology. So it is a change. And look, once again, it drives me nuts that at this moment in time, all we're hearing is about the things that are wrong in national politics and Labour this and Labour that. If you look at some of the good things that we're doing, they are genuinely life-changing.
Absolutely.
I mean, they are, you know, the stuff that we're doing on workers' rights and all that.
No,
Any Labour government in history would be proud of them.
We run a weekly column every Friday, which is called Delivering in Government, and it's, you know, the good news that Labour has delivered this week, and we never ever run out of content.
No, but you don't see it on the telly.
But you don't see it on the telly, but you do see it on LabourList.
Yeah, well, I'd say for anybody listening to it, take note of that. And we all.
The reason we put it out on the Friday is so that people can take it out on the doorsteps on a Saturday, right?
Yeah. But we should have better representation on the telly. If you have a look at the likes of Questions Time, which have given up on, you know, 3 sort of right and far right individuals and one person from the left, you know, how is that balanced? And everybody moans about the BBC. I'm just particularly talking about that. Having that awful GB News and all that, and being able to just put propaganda out at any stage, the likes of the internet and social media flooded with bots, you know, from Russia or China or wherever they're coming from, who talk down every achievement. So this is the existential threat I was talking about before. We need to do something that we can get messaging out in easily understandable, bite-sized pieces for the electorate. And so what you're doing should be things that we start putting out on our leaflets.
Absolutely.
Everybody should be putting them sort of things out so that universally people start to understand that Labour's doing an awful lot of good.
Now, we're coming to the end of our time together, sadly. So I just want to ask a few kind of wrap-up questions. So, first of all, who is your Labour hero and why?
Wow. I haven't got a hero because I've got a football hero, but he's now my mate, so that's a bit weird, isn't it? But this Kenny Dalglish.
Well, they say never meet your heroes, but actually sometimes it's fantastic.
Yeah, sometimes best thing ever. Never meet your heroes. Oh, listen, Paul McCartney, I don't want to meet you because you're my hero.
Yeah, right.
You might disappoint me. No,
no.
I would meet all my heroes. I suppose it'd obviously be an international one, and there's some great ones to choose from. But I always love listening to the comparison between the likes of the oratory of Obama and the clown at Nalgo.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely.
It's great, isn't it? You're just like chalk and cheese.
Chalk, absolutely. Completely. And then, now, I don't know if you know this, Steve, because they do keep very quiet about it in Liverpool, but there's this band from the city.
Many bands.
But there's this one in particular that people might have heard of called the Beatles.
Oh, a mop-top combo.
A mop-top,
from the 60s.
Yeah. Never really got anywhere, obviously.
No, done all right.
But yeah.
All right, yeah.
So, obviously, it's hard. I won't ask you who your favourite Beatle is because you will divide your city into 4. But I will ask you, what's your favourite Beatles song and why? I tell you what I'll go for, and it changes if you've got a back catalogue like the Beatles. It changes all the time. And with your mood, of course.
Yeah, definitely. But there are places only because the original lyrics in that were John Lennon reminiscent about places in Liverpool. And whilst you got Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields and other references, there's some in Glass Onion about the Cast Iron Shore, which is just up from where the Arena and Convention is, where we have our Labour Party conferences.
Absolutely.
I just think the sentiment of there are places that you've loved all your life. I think that's wonderful. No. And by the way, I don't know whether you've sort of started to understand, but that's a place that I love. It's called Liverpool.
Do you like Liverpool? You're a fan.
I think it's the best place that I've ever been in my life, and I'm fortunate enough to have travelled. But the people are the salt of the earth, and we have got some of the best heritage and architecture anywhere I've ever seen.
I mean, it is a beautiful city.
It is.
I'm incredibly fond of Liverpool. I didn't go to Liverpool until I was in my late 30s, and then I started spending a lot of time there. And it's Love you. But it's a very diverse city.
Yeah.
And as you said, we do descend upon you once a year as the Labour Party. And we tend to just sort of stay around the Albert Docks. But where else would you suggest that people go out and about in Liverpool?
Do you know, if you went to places like West Kirby, you would think that you were somewhere on the European continent. So the beaches are just wonderful. Further on in down the sort of estuary towards Sefton, you've got a red squirrel sanctuary and all that, and wonderful places of nature. If you go to Prescott, which is in Knowsley, they've got the Shakespeare North Theatre, which is, if it was in London, there'd be gazillions of people standing outside queuing to get in, but it's a really well-used thing. In fact, me and a certain Andy Burnham did a thing on there last week on Thursday to an audience, which we also promoted, a band from Manchester and a band from Liverpool, young bands as well, because we're really into our music. There's something for everyone. Tony Wilson once said about Manchester, he said, Manchester's got everything apart from beaches. Well, we've got them as well.
There you go. And I would say, my tip for the top, get out slightly and eat on Bold Street.
Oh, wonderful area, yeah.
Absolutely fabulous.
Go to the
area.
Independent District, go to around Baltic Triangle, and great places there. And you'll find little sneaky pubs that
Café
are
de
on
Bac.
Loads, Ykrach. There's loads and loads of good little pubs, and there's a gem around every corner.
Fantastic. And finally, if you were to invent a slogan for Liverpool, what would it be?
Best place on the planet.
There you go. Steve Rotheram, it's been a genuine pleasure. Thank you so much for spending this evening with us.
You said we were going to do one song at the end. We're not doing it now.
I'll sing if you will.
We've run out of time.
Do not tempt me. If I've got a mic in front of me, it's hard to stop me.
I'm heartbroken, I'll miss it.
Well, the thing is, Steve, you'll have to come to LabourList karaoke at conference.
There you go. What a segue.
What a segue. Almost like I had made you do it, and I didn't. Steve, thank you for being our first guest. I think one of the things that really matters to us at LabourList is making sure that we don't just represent SW1. So I think it was quite a good statement of intent to have a Metro Mayor as our first guest. So we're really, really grateful both to you, Steve, and to the Fabian Society for hosting us and for partnering with us on this. And we will see everybody next time.
Thank you, and thank you, technical team.
So we've just finished recording our first episode of In Conversation with Steve Rotheram, and it was such a fascinating, interesting conversation. I mean, to be quite honest, it touched all of the things that have always interested me. The devolution and how we make sure that the nations and the regions and the different parts of the UK, the parts that don't always get to the front of the queue, are treated equally and fairly, and bringing those Labour values across the country. And Steve's so passionate about that. It was fantastic to listen to him talk about that and really reflect on both how you do that from a northern perspective, but also selling it to me as a Londoner, which he did a very good job of, I have to be fair. We also talked about politics in general, the culture of it, what it feels like to feel like a bit of an outsider sometimes in a political world that wants you to feel that way. And then, of course, you'll be unsurprised to know the Metro Mayor of the Liverpool City Region talked about the Beatles. So we had a little bit of light-hearted discussion of music and football, as much as I could ever talk about football. And just sort of, who was Steve Rotheram as a human being? And that's as much an important part of these sessions as anything else. So thank you so much if you have joined us. And please make sure that you do join in with the next session of LabourList and the Fabian Society's In Conversation series. For our next fantastic episode of In Conversation with LabourList, hosted by the Fabian Society. We are having an International Women's Day special. So we don't have just one guest for you. We have two amazing, peerless Labour peers. We'll be joined by Baroness Hayter, Diane Hayter, who was the first ever female General Secretary of the Fabian Society and now sits in the House of Lords for Labour. And we'll also be joined by Baroness Margaret Curran, former Labour MP for a Glasgow seat and now sitting in the House of Lords. So we'll be talking about what it's been like being a woman in politics, being a woman in thought leadership, being a woman who sits even today in an institution that can sometimes feel very male-dominated and very, very stuffy and old-fashioned. So join me to celebrate all things sisterhood on our International Women's Day special. We'll be holding this on Monday, the 9th of March at 6 p.m. Join in.